Hey, buddy, you right?
No, bad. So, welcome to the podcast anyway.
How you doing, mate? Good to meet
Not
you.
bad. Nice to meet you. So, you do a bit of strategy, I know, sort of brand design and
hmm
management. So, I know a lot of people sort of struggle with the strategy sides often. How would you sort of describe brand strategy?
it's interesting. I think it is really confusing. I think a lot of people in the industry, as well as CEOs, as well as practitioners, I think we all kind of struggle. With brand strategy is right. So I would say strategy is a way or a a piece of information or a movement or an action that informs a plan. Okay, so if we need to get from A to B and we're building a bridge, our strategy, is to find a way to get from one side of the land to the other, and that informs that we have to then build a bridge. And to build a bridge, we need to put wood, we need to get people, we need to get staff, right? So it informs every action that happens to get from A to B, right? So I think if we think about that as a simple analogy, the strategy is the decision we make that we have to get from one side to the other, and that will then, if we need to get population from this mass of land to this mass of land, we need a strategy. Our strategy is to build a bridge that informs the plan. The plan is then, okay, how do we make the bridge? If that makes sense. And that's
Yeah,
kind of in simple terms.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
often it's sort of complicated where people say there's this term or there's that term for a certain thing.
Yeah.
And then over time it's like, so is it a purpose I'm looking at or a mission or like a
Yeah, well, it's just
vision?
it's the objective, right? The strategy is
Yeah,
kind of like, what's that objective? Like, what, going back to that analogy I just used of the bridge is like, okay, somebody has, seen a piece of land on that side, but in between us, there's a river or a sea. And we know that we need to get that there to earn more money. So
yeah,
how do we, if we know from a business point of view, if we can get over there, we make more money, right? So we need to come up with a strategy. And that strategy is if we can then get people over there to increase revenue by farming or whatever, I'm making a scenario up. That is our objective. That's our strategy. So then the next bit then is okay, so that informs the plan. So we know what the objective is. We know if we get over there, we can increase revenue by starting farmland and agriculture and whatever. So
yeah,
that informs the plan. So what do I have to put in place to make that work? People, process, time, products, whatever it is, bridge, boat, cows, whatever. We need to work that out. And I think if you simplify that and that analogy, it helps people understand what a strategy is, and then obviously that informs the plan.
what inspires how you work and your ideas for like how we do certain processes.
I take influence on quite a lot, really. I think it's great for creatives, not just strategists, but creatives alone, just to look kind of wide and look at how things in life, everyday life, can influence us. I started my business from RZA, from Wu Tang, from how a band was formed. You can start to adapt different forms of your process from different, sectors and different industries because they've worked out a quicker, streamlined way of doing things. I think yeah, inspiration comes from a lot of things, but I think the major thing I think anyone listening should do is absorb information from as many people around you in your early stages because I think you never really understand when you're going to need them later in life. And a lot of the things I use now, learn now, how I approach things now, were heavily influenced by people in my early career. People like Damon John, he was a massive inspiration for me. One of my first bosses, a graffiti artist called Stern Rockwell, um, they taught me not only things about business, but about life and how to think and how to approach. And I think you don't realize it when you're younger that these things come back into your life later on, you know?
I'd say there's a lot of different people that you have. Sort of, someone might do photography or they might do
Yeah.
art, but they might have a
I think,
similar
I think I
idea.
think from your point of view, like, just looking at how other people approach perspective, like I guess editing after effects, like after or retouching, you
Yeah,
could take so much kind of inspiration out of other areas and bring it into your life, and
yeah,
viewpoints section. And who knows, but I think it'd be interesting. Even subjects, like I think there's so much you could
yeah,
probably take from that. But I think with you, I'm quite au fait with photography. My partner's a photographer, quite
yeah,
big in her field, and just looking at things outside the lens. How we set up, how we
yeah,
talk to people, how we build a brand around the camera. Because nine
yeah,
times out of ten, a lot of people can shoot technically the same way,
yeah,
but it's how you build your brand around that lens, around that camera, going to make you a better photographer. You know what I mean?
definitely. And about hip hop and sort of influence from there, and what would you say market and wise or sort of recently that you've seen in hip hop that sort of stood out?
I don't. I think there's just music genre movements are happening.
Yeah,
I think what's beautiful for me, which not only shows my age, but it is the rebirth of kind of like 90s, early 2000 kind of hip hop.
yeah,
Artists are emerging, and it just shows you kind of from a brand point of view how the five pillars of hip hop actually are elements of brand. From communication through to expression through to visuals. It just shows you that if you build a brand properly, you can re-emerge it at any point and it will still have a part in society. And I think that's what's happening now, with the likes of Big L and DJ Premier and, even like the Wu-Tang and people that are re-emerging and coming back out 20, 30 years later are still fitting back into society and, almost reinventing themselves to a younger generation. And I think that's been really inspiring to watch and beautiful to see that these are brands that have been built and they've stood the test of time and they're coming back and they still have such a loyal following. And they've got new generations now that they're inspiring. And I think that's something that's, not only just in hip hop, but it's happening in music, which is great. And it's great to see from a creative, industrial, but most of all, kind of a brand point of view.
I've seen some of the Pharrell's sort of start producing again and sort
Yeah.
of things like that.
Yeah, but I think there's some beauty in like, take Pharrell as a producer. He's got this amazing ability to
Yeah,
adapt and evolve with time and move and he'll
yeah,
he'll bring things probably from his past, but then elevate them and bring them into modern day and they still
yeah,
sound like they belong. And again, it's
yeah,
just that's creating an identity, but an identity from a sonic point of view, not just a visual
yeah,
point of view. So that's backing, his brand of who Pharrell is, but his sonic or his identity comes from the
yeah,
way he produces and how he produces. And again, that's a good way of demonstrating to your listeners and
yeah,
viewers, what a brand is and what branding is, right? So
yeah,
I guess if we said something and using Pharrell as that example, like if Pharrell is a brand, he's Mr. Nice Guy. He's the man of the people. He's very you think about LV, you think about the Lego movie, you think about Nerd, you think about everything. That's everything behind the Pharrell brand. But as soon as you see the Pharrell identity, he's obviously quite forward, quite open. His sound is very like cosmic. I think you look at his backstory. So there's a very good way of showing, okay, this is brand and this is branding. Branding is everything behind Pharrell. Brand is Pharrell himself, which you see as the visual or the sonic identity.
I would just say it's sort of important if you're sort of working on a strategy and doing workshop.
What's important,
Yeah,
the obvious one is just repetition and practice. I think
yeah,
insanely important. Don't get caught up in the scenario, your own headspace of thinking, all right, I've done this 15 times, I need to change it. I've done this over and over, I need to change it. The better you can become as a facilitator, and I think it's what we're leaning into from workshop point of view, is if you know your work inside out, you know your decks inside out, you can remove any elements of kind of unknown from that room, your workshops are going to flow better, right? So if we know what slides next, we know what's coming, we don't even have to look at the presentation board. We can read a room, we can read the people, we know the environment. Like if we can reduce all those elements of unknown, our workshops are going to get better. And I think back to your point, for anyone starting out or wanting to understand how workshops work, it's a huge process. It's not just a case of walking into a room and saying, da da, this is it. Like there's so much more that needs to go into the upfront process before we even get into that room. From understanding people, from understanding, personalities, from doing psychometrics on people, to putting teams together, to knowing an objective, to having everyone aligned in the room, right? It's a huge task. And I can help with, people, anyone listening, if you want to drop me on LinkedIn, you can, we can talk about that. But yeah, I think, start by practicing, start by trying to present to people. I mean, I still do it now and I'm 20 years in, like I still will set up my deck and I'll present to myself and I'll just run timings. I'll run, see how things go. I'll try and do the work myself just to see how long things are going to take to create that agenda because timing's crucial. You know what I mean? And again, just repetition, repetition, repetition. It seems obvious, but it's a game changer.
Yeah, what got you into strategy and sort of interested in it?
Um, Long story, really.
Mm.
I have an interesting career. I started out in fashion. I kind of became a man in New York. I learned my trade in America, and I moved from fashion into design, into agency, marketing, advertising, through kind of 12 years of being in New York. And yeah, that path kind of led me finally into a branding agency, where I headed up, a creative department, and I was kind of the thoughts behind that team. An amazing team, actually. Like they're doing far much more than I am right now, even though they're younger than me and behind me. Super talented bunch of people. But that really got me to understand the difference between brand and branding. It was mainly in sports, so it's quite an interesting sector. You don't really think about brand and strategy, uh, you know, coming out of sport, but it really is. It's much more clinical and everything strategic and everything really with the focus on money and performance in sports is hyper clinical that we have a strategy and we try and execute it. And that's when it came into play with me probably in 2008, and I started getting into rooms and I started really understanding how we could use data insight and strategic thought to influence creativity, influence, campaigns, marketing, output, product, anything really. And then I really got the bug. So started then looking into people in my sector. I was actually quite heavily inspired by a guy called Ed O'Hara, who's a huge strategic insight into US sports, and I had the honor really of working with him for his company, and that started really making me think and position things differently in my mind. I think as soon as you start, and anyone seeing or listening to this is, as soon as you start trying to like reframe things in your mind and think that okay, I've been given this brief, but if we start to look at the brief wider, there's a bigger problem here. And what's the real problem we're trying to solve? It might not be, I'm thinking just something off the bat. It might not be like somebody comes to you with I need a new logo or I need a new, like, well, they're not going to ask you for an identity. They're going to ask for I need a new logo. Well, why is that? Oh, well, suddenly, our sales aren't performing anymore. We can't seem to move any ROI. And then you stop and say, right, okay, so is it the logo that's issue, or is it that people have changed, the customers changed, somebody a competitor's come onto the landscape that you don't know about and has took your market share? Like just thinking like that makes you, all right, this is a strategic step now. So you're saying it's the logo, but I'm telling you really the logo could be perfectly fine. I've had this scenario happen where this company was a removal company, international, global. It'd been going for 30 years. It was family generation. And I had a client come to me and was like, I need a new logo. We need a rebrand. And I was like, why? You know what I mean? Like, and it was like, oh, well, we can't seem to move with things are, we keep throwing money at marketing and nothing's changing. And I was like, okay, let's take a step back. Like, let's look at the scenario, right? You just come out of a pandemic. People didn't really move too much, like people were locked down for nearly 2 years. Yes, you picked up other work, which was in there. So I think they had a contract with BP and they were relocating people from around the world. But again, that stopped. I was like, so I think there's more value in putting your time and effort into looking at how you could reposition your company to a new audience, or look at how I guess removal services have changed in the last 2 years, and seeing if there's any new competitors coming out that's taking your work, then putting all your money into a rebrand. And this client just didn't really take that well. And he was like, no, I asked you for a rebrand. Like, I wanted a quote on that. And I was like, well, I don't believe my company could better your results just by a rebrand. Yes, we could. It look visually better. Get that. But is that going to move your bottom line? Is that going to change the problem? So going back to that question you asked about, as soon as you start thinking bigger, wider, and you start looking at the first principle or the original, reframe the narrative, reframe the problem, that's when strategy should start to tick, and that's when you're starting to think strategically. So then you can start to look at people like Martin Numia, you know, um, people in that ilk that's really been known for changing the narrative of industries, and start digesting their books, start reading them, start listening to them, start trying to think like them, because them, going back to I guess that camera theory, I thought anyone can teach you how to take a great photo, but then nobody can teach you how to think. Nobody can copy our minds, right? And that's when you start to lean in and move into strategic thinking. And once you've kind of got that bug and you start to look at things differently and you gain the superpower, that's when you can start moving things, and changing briefs. And then hopefully you'll get a good outcome, and that outcome then makes you known for strategy, so to speak.
What I sort of learned about brand recently is sort of reading, is it Emotion by Design by
Mm,
Greg Hoffman. That
yeah,
goes on about a sort of a frame is the sort of brand has its frame, and then the pictures what it's saying, do, and
yeah.
how people think of your brand, and the identities, the frame around it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I can totally see that metaphor of like a bit like what we're saying is
Yeah,
going back to what I said about brand and branding, like
yeah,
if we took the Italian flag and that
yeah,
was your picture, and that's inside that frame that you're saying. When I say to you Italy straight off the bat, what are you thinking when you see Italy or when you see that Italian flag? You're thinking Ferrari, you're thinking pasta, you're thinking football team, you're thinking Rome, you're thinking Lean Tower Pizza. Like you said, that frame around it is all the bits that's
yeah,
associated with that flag. So your picture analogy is great. It's like, here's a picture of Van Gogh with no ear. Like, what's everything thinking
yeah.
about like behind that? And I think that's a great analogy.
Or just say is a good example of sort of a brand or campaign that you've seen.
Recently,
Yeah,
well, the obvious ones are things like Liquid Death,
yeah,
where we saw like a genius way of basically selling water by
yeah,
really looking at a bigger, wider purpose and then leaning into that purpose. Um, but yeah, I think they're great examples of recent ones. I think
yeah,
there's other case studies like Skins, relevancy that comes around in that respect. I think
yeah,
there's a lot of like leverage in that. But I think the obvious example is really looking at Liquid Death and how
yeah,
they use purpose, which is obviously like death to plastic, which is about removing that, and obviously that stems back into ocean, degrade and whatever, and using water as a vessel to kind of get that purpose and that message across. I think they're genius. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think that'd be a good example to use. Probably one that everyone's expecting, but it is probably the biggest case study out there. From 0 to like 7 billion or whatever in 3 years is insane.
Is a mischief the sort of trainer brand as a one that
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, exactly. Again, I think they just ride off viral though, right? They're trying to
yeah,
make viral movements with extreme objects,
yeah,
clothing, whatever that's trying to push boundaries. But again, clever.
yeah,
I really always question like what's behind it though. I love it. It's like
yeah,
viral. I love it's kind of shock factor,
yeah,
but I don't know what they're really. Yeah, it's never made me curious enough to go why they're doing that. Do you know? I
yeah,
just think, oh,
yeah.
that's crazy. That's cool. Like.
The best at marketing is probably made when
Mhm.
it comes to sort of video and production and having a message behind each video. So
Yeah. Definitely. I would definitely be right. And they're relevant. They're always socially
yeah,
relevant. They always react to society. They always act or react to movements within society, political, social. So I think they're always on top of their game in that respect for sure.
yeah. So what is the sort of best way to focus on like longevity of a brand when you're building a strategy or sort of long term?
Like I said at the start, so when we're thinking about this strategy,
Yeah,
whatever that may be with the company you're working for, normally it's a 25-year kind of thought process, right? We're thinking 25 years ahead. So
yeah,
instantly we're trying to push you to think 25 years down the line. We should start to understand that purpose. And as long as we can keep that purpose at the focus of what we're doing, so the purpose should act as a litmus test of everything that happens in our business, internal, external, who we align to, who we sponsor, who we hire. So if we keep that in mind, the longevity of the brand itself should live, right? Because the first exercise we've made you do from a strategic insight activity is think 25 years further. So if we can keep that in our focus, then every decision we make, we should be focusing on that longevity of that brand. Now we have to understand that brand is a long-term activation and marketing is your short-term activation. So as long as those two are working together, your short-term activation will still keep pushing your brand further. It will still keep pushing it along, still keep going it, but you've still got that main focus that's keeping you all aligned. So again, back from a strategic point of view, if we know what our purpose is, and then we can make a plan around that to keep pushing and focusing that purpose at the front and center of everything we do, you should technically then have a brand that lives for as long as possible. Again, you've got to be dynamic, so that purpose always stays the same, but how we deliver that purpose could be very different because we know, as I've said before, people can change, behavior changes in society, the world can change. So we have to learn to adapt and react to that, and that will keep our brand alive. If we don't, we're going to die. You know what I mean? Like Mothercare, Toys R Us, these didn't respond, and they died. They just didn't happen because they had this longevity of brand that went on forever and ever and ever, and totally forgot about the people. And as soon as the people move, your brand is dead, right? If you've got no customers, you're dead. So you've got to keep that in mind, but that has to still be keep, the focus of the purpose of who you are, what you do, and why you matter to who and why. As long as that's staying true, then we can, focus again. And again, that could be broken down into 5-year, 10-year, 15-year plans within that 25-year, sprint. But all those plans are then driven by a different objective and almost like phases to keep things going.
because I shift a few times to try and figure out what the plan is. I was like, is it going to be this route or is it going to be that route? And so
But as long as you're focused, as long as as your personal brand,
yeah,
Stephen, can work out, why you do what you do,
yeah,
right? Beyond making money. If no one paid you, why do you do what you do?
yeah,
Right? That becomes like your purpose. Like, so I'm getting out of bed today to put a smile on someone's face. Whether I
yeah,
get paid or not, and that's my purpose. And how am I going to do that? Right? So this is my plan. Okay, so how am I going to do that today? Okay, so everyone I see, I'm going to smile at.
yeah,
Every door I see, I'm going to hold it open. I'm going to let someone through. If I'm talking in line, I've got a bit of dead space, quiet time. I'm going to turn around and try and crack a joke, make someone smile. I'm going to ask an old lady if she's okay. I'm going to you know what I mean? Everything we're doing, I could leave a £5 note like on the wall. Like everything I'm doing is that plan because I know I'm getting out of bed today to make someone smile. And that, if we did that for 25 years, my brand will grow, 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 grow. I'll be known for that guy that makes someone smile
yeah,
because my strategy and my purpose was so simple and easily to activate. And then I had a plan of how I was going to activate it, and I repeated it daily, daily, daily. Over time, your brand becomes successful. And I think that's what you got to try and do there is just keep focusing on why you exist beyond making money and how you're going to bring that to life.
I think that's how this came about, sort of like casting of sort of higher education, don't be there's sort of gaps where it doesn't teach everything.
Definitely not. Didn't teach life lessons, man.
Yeah,
And again,
it's
like
like
just a bit about my
yeah,
background is like I'm dyslexic. I didn't realize I was dyslexic till
yeah,
later in life. I'd got all the way through school into university uh, by thinking I was thick, stupid, and
yeah,
everything else that you did 30, 40 years ago, because this thing like dyslexia wasn't really on the tip of anyone's tongue or
yeah,
even in the front of people's minds. And then, like you said, these life lessons come along where we're doing stuff daily. Like we're learning from, your higher education is from people, I think,
yeah,
and interaction, engagement, learning. And if you're clever enough to, like I said at the top of the call, act like a sponge and absorb all that, you never know when it's going to come back around. And I think going back to, yeah, your purpose, if it is something along the lines of educating people through speaking, talking, exposure, just keep doing it. But then find out how we bring that into your daily life and not just podcasts.
yeah, definitely. I think I do try to be more sort of in daily, bring things in and it's
Yeah.
like helping other people out because I sort
Yeah.
of just volunteer now and again and I sort of help out
Perfect.
with
Yeah.
how can I get less things to have done in the day later on.
Definitely. And I see you doing it on your content on LinkedIn, but just really try and hammer down like why you do what you do. And it's hard, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong. Like if it was easy, everyone would understand their own purpose. People wouldn't
yeah,
pay strategists to figure it out. And it's hard and you really got to think about it. But then once we've got that purpose, what like just look at Roger Martin's framework, the cascaded choices, like, what do we have to do to put that in place? Like who do we have to hire to make that happen? What do I have to do every day to bring that to life? It's once you get it, it's easy, but finding it is hard for sure, you know.
definitely. So what's the one thing that you recommend people do if they could take the first step towards strategy or building their own strategy?
Yeah. So 9 times out of 10, like I say this to a lot of my mentors or my mentees, should we say, 9 times out of 10, I'm mentoring people that have either been through graphic or creative journeys. Um, and I've kind of developed this way of like trying to get people in front of people. Okay. Because I think that's your first step. Like I said to you earlier, like practice. There's nothing going to make you a better facilitator or strategist if you're not in rooms and you're not asking questions to those people that you're going to be working with. You could do it with your mom, you could do it with your girlfriend, you could do it with your dog. They're not going to respond like a client. They're just never going to do that. So I always create this thing called case study currency, right? So we can then start thinking about, okay, so we need an objective for a workshop. So let's say we need to reposition a brand. Okay, so that's our objective. So we need to create a workshop around that. Their final outcome is to finally help them understand how they positioned against competition, their customer, and how their company shows up. So we have to then work that back and create a set of frameworks, right? And once we've got that in place, then I introduce this thing called case study currency, right? So the only way you're going to get in front of people is is by having, or showing future clients that you've done this. So start looking at your network, start looking at people you're working with. Um, you as a photographer might be a little bit different, but if you're a graphic designer or you've been through a creative journey like like the listeners might be, let's look at a scenario that might happen. So somebody might come to you and say, I need some brand photography, or somebody listen, like, I need a new logo. So we start there and we say, right, I'll do this logo for X, but I'm willing to throw in a workshop to try and get some deeper understanding of who you are, what you do, and why you matter, right? So if we can then get this information from you, that's going to steer the identity of the way we shoot you. Do we shoot in black and white? Do you smile? Do you not? What do you wear? Where do we position you from an identity point of view? Is like what's his personality? What's his color? What's his objective? And then we can start drilling in and align this to a customer. And once we align that to a customer, then the results are hopefully going to be better because we'll get a connection to that customer and our ROI or our engagement will go up. And they say, oh, that sounds great. But you say, okay, I'll do that as well as the job you're paying for more. I'll do that for free if you can give me a video testimonial, a written testimonial on LinkedIn, and some form of acceptance that I can use your work in my portfolio or on my website. If we tick that box, say, yeah, brilliant. So then you get paid for your job at the start, but you're adding in this value that they would never, if you were to turn around and say, like, that's 8 grand on top, 10 grand on top, they would never pay that. They're not even going to pay that for your logo or your headshots. But you then get to a point where you're then in the hot seat. Yeah, you're leading that. You can say, right, so I've got this workshop and you figured it all out, you've done all your deck, you've worked out your timings and you run this workshop with them, right? They have the greatest experience because you're pulling information from them they never thought they would even be asked, right? They never see the value of why they're being asked it. Okay, you get all this information, then you form this document that's going to then inspire and inform your objective at the start, which is your headshots or your logo. And you can quickly then turn around and say, well, if your purpose is to make someone smile, then we need to do something wacky in this, in your pose, right? We could put color gradient over there, everything's yellow. You could be wearing a clown nose. Who knows? Like, but these are decisions now that are made because strategically your audience are expecting you to put a smile on someone's face. And that's the audience we're aligning to. So if we align to them, we're going to win. Don't worry about the ones that's going to think, well, this guy's weird in this photo. He's got a clown nose. We don't need to worry about them because we've made the decision we need to be over here. And then all of a sudden, your results are great. And you've got this case study then that you can show your work, you can show your process. If you're clever, you've done a video, you've probably recorded yourself in rooms, and then you've got a video and a written testimonial at the end of it. If you can do that 3 or 4 times to 3 clients, you've got 3 case studies there that say, Stephen was great to work with because he did this, he did this, he did this. I ran a workshop. He understood my needs, he understood my audience and my outlook at my results. If you get case study currency 3 times, that goes on your website. There's 3 clients there. You then have if you've been successful, by the way, you then have the right to then go out and charge for strat and say, right, I can do this. We can do headshots, but if you want to add on a bit of strategic insight in a workshop, it goes to this. And then you've got 2 packages, and instantly you've got good and better. Then you need best. That'll come later on. But then you can start working, right? And we can start putting packages together. We can charge more. Our reputation grows. Your reputation grows as a brand XYZ. So back to your point, case study currency is the way. Like get in front of people. The more times you're challenged by business owners, it's going to educate you tenfold than trying to do it yourself. You know what I mean? Business owners will ask questions you've never been dealt with. The way you're going to learn to respond to those business owners, and you've got to be confident because, technically you're changing the way their baby's going to talk, act, dress, behave, everything. They need to trust you, you need to trust them. And that's not going to come by sitting, chatting. You need to be in intense, high pressured situations where you're pushing your client and getting information, extracting information out, and then you're going to do something with it later. That makes sense.
I think that's all the questions that
Okay,
I've
buddy.
got. Okay.
Yeah, man. How do you feel about your little journey? What would you say is happening with you right now?
Probably a lot of learning, a lot
Yeah,
of reassessing things, and sort of recently I was like, I need to reassess this, whether I want to start again. or stay with the same client
Mm.
that that isn't quite right. So
No.
I was like, I'll just look at it and I was like, I'll start again, see where to go from there and sort of how to align more.
Mm. Are you still got are you still in touch with an existing client? Have you still do you still communicate with any of them?
Not really, because I only had the one
Right.
long term wise. So
But what I was asking that is that you if you've got a knowledge base that you can go back to,
yeah,
and again, I think you've obviously made the decision to start again, but looking back, you could have turned back to that customer or that client
yeah,
and said, right, where could I improve? And it's sometimes it's hard truths that's going to fuck us up, right? But hard truths are real, right? And that's where uncomfort starts. That's where learning starts. When we get a bit uncomfortable and we don't like to hear stuff. But if you turn back to that old client and say, all right, this is what I did for you, you know me quite well. Like if I was to try and evolve and grow, where do you think I should grow? Right. And you've got first-hand experience there of consumer insights, right? You're not asking your mate, you're not asking your mom, you're not asking your dog, go back to that time, but you're asking a real client, how could I improve? Where did I go wrong? Where could I, if you were to rehire me again, what would I have to change? And just ask these questions. And it's hard to accept sometimes because you might read shit you don't want to hear, but that will better you if you react to that positively. That's going to benefit you massively, man. These are the simple things. Again, going back to like problem framing. Like if we want more clients, let's ask our clients what they need. Let's ask our previous clients where I failed, and let's better that or change that and react to it. You know what I mean? And again, that's you know if my strategy or if my single line strategy is to get more clients, so what's the plan? What plan do I need to put in place to make that happen? Yes, I need to get in front of people, but firstly, I need to start working out where I went wrong or what I could improve better to make that journey better for them or their experience better. Therefore, my brand's going to get bigger, better, stronger, more valuable. And I'm going to charge more money. And not only that, they're going to talk about me, and I'm going to get more clients. That seems a short, quick win, but that's going to take years of development, change, and growth, right? But just start there. Just start really. If you've got first hand on client, ask them questions, and you'll be surprised sometimes, like where the value comes from. Like my business, until I did this exercise, I didn't realize. I thought we were all about caliber and global brands, and when it really works out that like the value, and if you go on our website about being a wingman, the value that most of my clients see in me and my team is that we'll put our arm around you, and we'll walk you through every step of this process, right? We don't want you to fail. We want you to win, because if you win, we win. So my brand gets better because your brand's getting better. And as soon as you bring that nurturing, that over delivery, empathetic approach to your customers, no matter who big, who they are, how big they are, how much money they're worth, that is such a value that not many people offer, because most of my industry is all about quick wins, in, out, cash cows, on to the next, and then they might get that client back again. But if you develop a long-term relationship where you're nurturing, understanding, empathetic, you can be vulnerable, you can be open, you can respond and react. And yes, we've all wanted to get away from that 10 p.m. call where shit's gone down and you need to react. But if you can get into a habit of like, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to try and help you, and I'm going to get my team on board if we can, and we're going to help you through this scenario of pain, and we're going to walk you through. That is so much more valuable than, you know, big major agencies that are going to just flip you in and out and then charge you probably an extra 20 grand for getting them awake at 10 at night. It's massive. And I didn't realize until we stepped back and asked our customers why they work with us, and that's quite arrogant of me for years of doing this. There's only 10 years ago we actually did it. It was like when I rebranded Confidential, I was like, oh shit, like the reality is, I used to think we were quick in and out support, and that was the beauty of us, which is great from a business model point of view. But the actual brand and the business itself was fueled by vulnerability, empathy, care, understanding, like the tangible output was obvious, but everything inside it was the bit that was valuable to my customers. Just start there. I know that was a long-winded effort answer, sorry, but it's important, you know.
Yeah. The main sort of long-term thing I did was just sort of editing. So I was behind the scenes sort of
Yeah.
1 year, just same person, many edits and stuff.
Mm. But like even that, like you could take because you've been sat watching, right? Or you've been sat analyzing the way shots are taken, the way a photographer is talking to a subject, right? Even in my junior years, and yes, I was in fashion, so it's quite different, but I used to sit there and just watch and learn and observe. And like even the way I started my business was because I hated the way that the industry worked, the way that brand was looked at as an object. And as soon as a brand was released, it was gone. And another one came in and we did another brand. But like brand can't work that way. Like we already established that marketing short term, and that's a quick campaign, which 6 weeks, 6 months can happen, and then it goes and we get a new one in. But brand, like that starts here, and you know, we have to hold your hand all the way through this until you get to a point where we're established and we're engaged, and then we can, scale up our brand. But agencies always saw it as like in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. And the brands failed. Like the companies failed. I've worked in the UK. I've partnered with other agencies where they just not put that emphasis on holding their hand after they've launched this brand, and it dies within 2 years, 3 years, like because they think that's it, job's done. In reality, like when you launch that brand, that's when it starts. And 18 months later, you might get an impression of how this brand is doing. And at 18 months, we have to look back, look back what we've tested, learn from it, and improve, and then go again. You know what I mean? And that can be 2 to 3 years before you see any kind of major result of a brand launch. It's insane. So even that is just, I know that was long-winded again, but just observing what you've learned and just responding to it in a way, and then talking that through to your client saying, I know the industry does it like this, but we don't do that. Like this is how we do it, and this is why. So we're showing empathy, we're showing understanding, we're showing care, we're showing we give a shit rather than just fucking money in and out. And again, they'll make your company and your brand much more valuable. You know.
Thank you for coming on anyway.
It's all right, mate. Anytime. And I help people, seek opportunities, minimize risks. And how I do that is from brand strategy to identity to creative to mentoring and coaching. So yeah, feel free to drop in. You can find me on LinkedIn, West Henstock, and I'll find time for you guys.
Also consider liking and subscribing if it was useful.